Hello friends, very good morning to all of you. So friends, welcome back to Anthropology PYQ series. So let's try to decode every question and let's master every concept. So friends, so we have stepped into new year, and in this new year, let's try to make the efforts still better, and let's try to achieve our destined goal, right? So on this note, let's try to begin the discussion and let's take up the question of the day. So what about the question of the day? The question, so almost we have completed 45 questions. So now we are in 45th question. 44 questions we have done. Look at the question now. Critically evaluate the concept of nation state and describe its impact on the indigenous societies. So this is the basic question. So the question is very straightforward question. So from your unit 8.2 of your paper 2. So where we can see the concept of nation state and its impact. So this is the region where we have got the question. Now let us try to understand this question in a simple fashion, and let's try to understand how we can approach better to this particular question, right? So shall we proceed further? So those who have joined in online, so you can just say, or you can just give indication that, shall we proceed further? So if you see, or if you can able to recollect in our previous discussion, so we were trying to discuss about the concept of ethnicity. So in ethnicity, we have said the word ethnic has been derived from a Greek word which means it's a nation. So what is nation? So from where we have to start the discussion, right? So let's try to understand this in a systematic fashion. So now let's try to understand this, the concept of the nation state first, right? So what is nation state? And then let's try to understand further more. So let's see first. So the concept of nation state. What is it? So when we see from the perspective of this word, the nation state. So nation state is a congregance of two important words. So one word is nation and other word is state. And the concept on whole, if you want to say, it's a kind of ethno-political concept. So we can say in a simple fashion. So this concept, the concept of nation state, it's a concept of, it's an ethno-political concept. Actually, this concept of nation state is a modern concept which has been evolved in the 17th century, around 1649, so through Westphalia Treaty. So this is another important information that you should remember. Nevertheless, no need to mention such kind of factual data here, but still you can remember that through Westphalia Treaty or through Westphalia Treaty, we have just brought in this particular concept. Now, so what is this? As I have said, it is made up of congregation of two important words. So we should systematically understand it. So first, let us try to just take up these things. So let's assume that, so there is one entity, that is nation, and there is other entity, let us assume state. So if you see from the perspective of the nation and if you see from the perspective of the state, so these are two important concepts that we have. So you might have read about what is nation and what is state in polity also. So here also let's try to have it in a systematic fashion. Now, if you look from the perspective of the concept of nation, and if you see from the concept of the state, so basically to say nation is simply to say it's nothing but it's a group of people. With common culture. So this is one important aspect that you should understand. So that's why we will say nation as a ethnic component or ethnic concept or we will say it as a demographic entity. So this you should remember. So nation is a kind of ethnic entity, or you should remember it as demographic entity. This thing you should remember first. Now, if you see what is state, so state is nothing but it's a political entity where it is characterized by some of the characteristics. Like let's say for example, a state will possess a set of population. A set of population will be there. And next thing, so a state will possess a kind of definite territory. This is another important thing. So a well-defined territory will be there for a state. It's a modern concept. So then furthermore, if you see, so a state basically will possess a kind of centralized authority for governing, for administration. This is another important characteristic. Then furthermore, if you see, very important thing that will be there with a state is that sovereignty. So if you want to call a particular entity or a particular region as a state, so it must and shall have to have one important thing that is known as sovereignty. Sovereignty means what? Sovereignty basically refers to the ability to govern themselves without having any external influence. When external forces will not control them and when they can rule themselves on their own, so that quality or that attribute is basically known as the sovereignty. So by having all this, what we can say, so the state basically it's a kind of political entity. It's a political entity. So these things you should remember. Now, if you look at the congruence of these two concepts, so say for example the nation and say for example the state. So at the congruence of both of them, so we can see another a small intersectional area. So this area, so this is basically known as the nation state. That means it is characterized by all the features. All the characteristics which are relevant to both of these concepts. So you have to remember this. Here also group of people are there, but common culture is there, homogenized culture is there, and it's an ethnic entity. So here if you see, so population is there, but along with the population you have territory is there, along with the territory centralized authority is there, and along with this you have this sovereignty also. So this is another important aspect that you should remember, right? So this is how the concept of this concept has been we can simply understand. Now after understanding this, we have to systematically know about what are the basic characteristics of the nation state. When we can understand the characteristics, then we can just look into the critical evaluation of the concept. So first, let's try to understand about the concept of the characteristics of the nation state. Right friends, so shall we? Let's proceed ahead. So now, let's see what are the important characteristics, or in other words, we can say tenets of nation state. What are the important tenets of nation state? So tenets means basically they are the basic features or basic characteristics. They are the basic common or simple features of that particular concept. Now what are the basic tenets? So first we have understood in the nation, so there we have saw that population will be there, for them a type of culture will be there. So first and foremost thing what we can understand from this is that, so the concept of nation state basically it envisions a kind of ethnic homogeneity. So that is one important aspect. So with a kind of dominant culture. So first and foremost thing that you should remember is this point. So first thing it is, it envisions it envisions ethnic homogeneity with a dominant culture. With a dominant culture. So this point you should understand. So basically when we see from the perspective of the nation state, so nation state will have a kind of, as it is composed of nation as well as state, so population will be there, for that population a particular culture will be there, and that culture will be majorly homogenized. So their way of dressing or their language or all those things, so mostly the cultural features will be similar. So that is one thing. Or if not the homogeneity entirely, so even if it is like a multi-ethnic state, say for example the nation states could be two types, so ethnic nation states and multi-ethnic nation states. So uni-ethnic and multi-ethnic, so there in that case particularly we can have the dominant culture. So this is another important thing that you should remember. But what about the if you see from the perspective of indigenous populations, so indigenous populations, they will have their own diverse cultures and their own diverse features. But here what happens with the concept of nation state, this may affect their cultural native culture, and it may, by in striving the homogeneity, it may help, it may erode their cultures. So that is another effect that we can see. Then as two concepts are the nation and state, so next important tenet is that it tries to assert a kind of definite territory. So that is another important aspect. So it basically asserts a definite territory with a kind of absolute sovereignty. This is other important tenet of it, right? So here, as it strives to assert a definite territory with absolute territory, so the boundaries will be carved in a systematic fashion, and the ability to rule will be there within themselves. So this is another important characteristic or a basic feature of it. Then, as it's a modern concept, so what further we can see? So we can have a kind of thing that they will have a kind of, it seeks to establish a kind of centralized authority, so where they will have their own administrative system. So it seeks to establish centralized authority. So with their own set of with their own governance system. So that is another important characteristic, right? So that's very important characteristic that we should know. Then furthermore, so when there is a defined territory and when there is a state, and particularly composed of a defined set of population with a culture, so they will have a sense of nationalism and they will have a sense of patriotism that we can say. So there you can say, so the concept of nation state, it fosters, that means it promotes, it fosters nationalism. That means a sense of nationalism and patriotism. That means in a positive connotation. So we should understand this. So this is another important characteristic. So where you can also see India is also a kind of nation state. So it has its own defined territory, and it has its own sovereignty, and it has its own centralized authority, and it has its own set of population, and the culture of the India is also more or less, though it is diverse cultures, but it's unity in diversity, we can say. So from that point of view, it's a multi-ethnic nation state, that India. So that's where you can see we can have a sense of nationalism and a sense of patriotism also. So that's another important aspect. Now, when we talk from the perspective of a nation state, particularly a nation state will have, or it tries to ensure the rights and duties of the citizens. So this is another important aspects. So rights and duties, they'll be enforced by common legal system. Common legal system, that is another important aspect. So there would be a common legal system through which we will just govern it, and we will adjudicate the disputes. So that is enforce this kind of rights and duties. So that is another important aspect, right? And apart from this, we can also expect a kind of citizenship. So this is another important aspect of it. We can have a fair citizenship. So these are basically nothing but important tenets of the the nation state. Now you have to just check into that, and you have to just critically evaluate them, so critically examine them. So to what extent these are relevant for the current times, and how they impact the indigenous population. So that's the basic question. So from that point of view, let us try to understand what are the important things like, say, impacts of the nation state on indigenous populations, indigenous societies. So let's try to understand that. So now you can just mention your points also in the group, in the chat box. Impact of nation state, or you can mention impact on indigenous societies. So when we see from the perspective of the this thing, so you can have some of the impacts. So what are those impacts? So first and foremost thing that we see, so when we are just trying to just make a particular, assimilate various people, like the tribes or indigenous populations there. So there we can see first and foremost effect would be that we are making the culture homogeneous. So that means we are erasing the diversity, and we are trying to just make it a single entity. So there the first and foremost impact that you can have is, so cultural erosion and loss of identity. So that would be the first kind of thing that you can remember. So the first thing you can remember is that, so cultural erosion and loss of identity. So this is one important aspect. So culture, basically what is it culture? Culture includes everything, the way of life. So way of life means the way we speak. Language is a part of culture. The way we dress, dressing sense, clothing is a part of culture. And the way we eat, the food and cushion is a part of culture. So religion is a part of culture. So all other aspects are parts of culture. So from that point of view, if you see, so we can have a kind of forced assimilation, forced cultural assimilation we can see in the nation state, because we are being united into a particular larger entity, indigenous societies, and they have to assimilate that particular culture. So here we can see the basic issues. So one is that where effect we can see forced cultural assimilation. Forced cultural assimilation with the mainstream sections of the people. So that is one another thing. And there Other important efforts could be that, say for example, endangerment of the languages. So languages may extinction of the languages or endangerment of the languages as another important effect that we can say. So there would be a greater threat of endangerment. Endangerment of languages. Languages will be at the endangered situation. So how shall we, if we look from the perspective of any evidence, so example, so can we see or can we evidence it in anywhere means, so if you see from the perspective of one of the important studies, so we have a scholar known as G.N. Davy. So G.N. Davy has conducted a kind of popular linguistic survey, so that is famously known as PLSI. So People Linguistic Survey of India. So this was one thing. So remember, so People's Linguistic Survey of India. So in short form it is basically known as PLSI, People Linguistic Survey of India. So this has been basically conducted by a scholar on the chairmanship of a scholar known as G.N. Davy. So this study has systematically shown that in India more than around 200 languages were at the endangerment. So this is one thing. So more than 200 languages are about to extinct. So this is a typical finding because of the nation state, when we have integrated the indigenous societies into the nation state. So that's what. So this is one important thing. So this is how you should try to incorporate the case studies, so wherever it is possible, so that you can just score or fetch more marks. So this is where one important thing that you should remember. Then furthermore, so when the nation state as it is a modern concept, so they will have their own ability to govern themselves. So they will go with respect to a lot of developmental projects. So developmental projects will also extend to the tribal areas, and developmental projects will also extend to the forest areas or untouched portions. So because of this, so indigenous populations or societies like tribes, so they will face some of the issues like land alienation and developmental displacement. So such kind of issues or such kind of impact would be there. So this is another important thing. So we can say it's a kind of land alienation and developmental, we can say developmental displacement of tribes. Let's make it tribes or indigenous societies. So this is one important impact that we can see with respect to the nation state. So there, simply to say for example, there was a study that has been conducted by Walter Fernandez. So Walter Fernandez has published a notes on the development induced displacement, so leading to how this leads to pauperization of the people. So this kind of information that you can mention here. So Walter Fernandez, so what he has done. So Walter Fernandez published a note So this note systematically showed that how development induced displacement leads to pauperization of the people. So what do you mean by pauperization? Pauperization means basically you will lose everything that's there in your hands. You will become a bare-handed person. So pauperization. So this is one another important thing. So land alienation. So you will lose the land that is there with you. So your own land, like where you are living, so that will be done. And apart from that, like you will be displaced from your native place to another important place, location. So because of this, so at the end you will become pauper. So pauperization. So that is another important thing. So that may occur, right? So furthermore, so when we see later on, so usually these indigenous societies, basically they used to rule on their own. But what happens with respect to the rise of these modern concepts like nation state, there would be loss of political autonomy. This would be one important impact. Loss of political autonomy. You can have this as another impact. And not only loss of political autonomy, so they will also lose their ability to self-govern themselves. So this is one important aspect. So self-governance ability. So this would be lost. So when they lose it, what could be the impact or how we can visualize it? So when we see most of the traditional governance systems have been eroded or have been lost in the contemporary situations. So that we can take it as an example, right? So you can see weakening of the traditional political institutions. So that we can have it, we can see, or weakening of traditional political institutions. So this could be an effect, further effect. So where we can see, so for example, from Gonds, if we talk about Gonds of the central India, so their panchayats, so their local panchayats have lost their relevance. And if we see from the perspective of Kasis of Meghalaya, so Darbar Shnong, so which was a kind of the traditional political entity, so it has lost its relevance. So let's say for example, Darbar Shnong of Kasis, further you can have these thing like, let's say, Gonds Panchayat, Gond Panchayats, they have lost the relevance. So this is where you can remember that this is how there would be some sort of impact, right? So I hope you can catch it. So this is one another important thing that you should remember. And not only this, so we can have some other impacts, like there we can have a kind of forced citizenship as well as bureaucratization of the population. So that could be another important impact. So there you can have it. So the point that you can incorporate is that, so there we can see forced citizenship and bureaucratization. Bureaucratization of the system. So this could be another important impact, so which can show some sort of negative aspects on it. So where we can see many of the, like there was an instance, like many of the Adivasis have lost their citizenship, or they have not included into the NRC during which was implementing in Assam region, because of lack of having some of the documents which are required to prove themselves as the citizens of this particular state. So this is where, so there could be a kind of forced citizenship and there would be a kind of further impacts. So many Adivasis excluded from NRC. So NRC in Assam. So there they have they could not able to produce the certificates. So here forced citizenship will be there, and because of this, due to lack of it, they may be excluded. So such kind of impact also could be seen. So from the nation state point of view. So this is one important aspect. Then furthermore, if you see, so if you can understand, so loss of, we can say, ethno-ecological knowledge, that will be there. So they'll lose their ecological knowledge and traditional farming abilities like that. So that is another important aspect. So there you can see another important impact would be loss of ethno-ecological knowledge. Ethno-ecological knowledge and traditional farming systems. So this could be another important impact on the indigenous people. Think about the traditional farming systems like the shifting cultivation. So jhum cultivation, which used to happen in the northeast, or shifting cultivation used to happen in across various parts of the tribal regions. So due to nation state concept, so we have discouraged the concept of the forest deforestation, and thus this thing has been stopped. And apart from that, so ethno-ecological knowledge. So there were so many traditional ecological knowledges were there. So these ethno-ecological knowledges have become a kind of, they were threatened with the sustenance. So that is another important thing like that. So furthermore, if you see, so as they have been moved from their own niche to the another niche or new niche, so where we can say, so basically there they will experience a kind of forced sedentarization. You can have this as another important impact. So there we can have forced sedentarization. Forced sedentarization and rise of a kind of dependence on others, and rise of dependence. See, earlier what they used to do, indigenous populations like tribes, they used to just go for hunting, they used to go for shifting cultivation, or they used to go for the pastoralism, and they used to have their own life. But due to this advanced modernized incorporation of concept, so they were being subjected to forced sedentarization. They have been made into labor, or they have been made into some other jobs, so where they have nothing to do with the active lifestyle, so they have been sedentarized. So that's one thing, and they started depending on the others for their survival. So this is how, so basically we can have some of the important impacts of our the concept of nation state. So now we were discussing about this impact of impact on the indigenous societies. So impact of basic the modern nation state. So what are the tenets? We have understood the tenets. So concept of nation state, what is it? So this is the nation state concept. So you should understand this, you should understand the characteristics, then you should understand the things. So like this you should proceed and you should learn, right? So this is all about this particular concept, right? So that's all, friends, from my side. So is that it clear for you? So is there any particular doubts in this particular concept? If there is any doubts, you can just text. Right. So I hope there are no more doubts. So friends, this here where we can stop the discussion, and let's try to take up another important question, and let's try to meet on Monday, and let's try to continue with another question. So that's all for the day from my side. So thank you all for joining with this session. So we'll meet again on Monday at 11:30 a.m. Thank you all.